Welcome to the Success Ascent. My name is Pat Mancuso, the creator and host of our show. Today we welcome Ozioma Egwuonwu. Ozioma is the founder of BurnBright and also the creator of the World Dream Day. On our podcast, she shared, "Don't die without knowing." She said, "Trust yourself and you know more than you think you know." We talked about how to activate your potential. Being an entrepreneur is about being consistent, the blind spots around hiring, and the challenges of getting clarity. I know you're going to enjoy the episode, so on to the ascent. Welcome to the Success Ascent. My name is Pat Mancuso, and I am the creator and host of our show. And we are excited you are with us today, and we are very excited about our special guest. Let me introduce to you Ozioma Egwuonwu. Now, I probably butchered that, and we tried it 13 or 14 times, and yet we are excited that she is here today. So let me tell you about her background. She's an internationally celebrated speaker, strategist, scholar, an expert in transformational strategy and systems of change. She's a chief strategic transformation officer of BurnBright International, a transformational training, coaching, and consulting company specializing in the development of activation of human potential. And boy, I think we need a lot of that right now. Ozioma is also the founder of World Dream Day, the first ever global empowerment day dedicated to activating ideas, goals, and dreams. With an estimated reach in 2020 of 74 million, World Dream Day is considered one of the most successful created holidays in recent history. Ozioma, welcome to our show.
Thanks, Pat. It's so great to be here. I'm so excited. Thank you for having me.
I am too, and I know our listeners are going to be with all the great things you have to share. So you already know this, right? That was you on paper. That was what we know. Tell our listeners and our audience something that's not on paper or something that maybe you've never told anybody.
Well, I mean, there's a lot that's not on paper, right? It's like when you read about someone, you're like, oh my gosh, they're like this. They must be very, and what people don't know, I think, is that I'm very silly and I love to have a good time. I'm also a hoop dancer. And so people say, what do you mean a hoop dancer? Like I do, when you see those people doing with the hula hoops and all that kind of stuff, I'm very into that world. And
really?
So people are, yes. And I even had like some famous photographers, Rudy Hoppen, like take photos of me with my hoop. And I'm just, people are always shocked when they say, you're a hoop dancer? It's like, yes, I absolutely love that experience. So yeah, that's a fun.
So do you have like a stable of hoops?
I do actually have a lot here where I'm currently speaking to you in Lisbon, Portugal. I have like about 4 hoops at that, like in my bedroom, and in New York, I have about like 7 or 8. I'm like hoop crazy. I get custom hoops.
Isn't that crazy? Yeah. I love it. I love it. See, that's why I do this part of the show is I always want to hear something so I can learn. So now I've got another potential hobby, hoop dancing. I love it. I love it. And don't you love technology? You're like in Portugal today, and we're talking, and I'm in Minnesota. Is it warm there?
It actually is warmer than, obviously, than New York, but it's not as warm as people would think because it does get that like gloom rolling in, but then some days you're just like, oh my gosh, it's like January. I'm like, and it's like 70 degrees and you're just like, oh, it's great to be here.
Yeah. Well, hopefully when you land in New York, it'll be just as warm as to where you are. So Ozioma, let's talk. The first thing I want to hear is you're an entrepreneur. You create this event, if you may. We're going to talk about that a little bit more, the World Dream Day. Yeah, let's talk about your journey as an entrepreneur. The Success Ascent is about the journey of success. And we know that the journey isn't always upward. Sometimes it's backwards. Sometimes it's sideways. So how did you get the entrepreneurial bug? Where did that start?
Well, some people, if they're looking at it from a cultural perspective, would say that because I'm traditionally, like I was born in Nigeria, and so I'm an Igbo woman, and that's like the tribe that's very entrepreneurial. We're known to always be like having business ideas and dreams and goals and that kind of stuff. And my mother was like that, and my grandfather was like that. But specifically, when it comes to my own journey, it wasn't like I was going to be an entrepreneur because I was a very successful, I guess you would say, professional employee. I had started off in advertising, working actually even before that in the world of film, doing work at Sundance and also supporting different independent films in New York City. And then someone one day said to me, you'd make a great strategist. And I was like, what is that? And they're like, the people who kind of come up with the plans and the ideas of how things need to get done. And I was like, I like that. And so I went back and got a second master's. And then I basically decided that I was going to switch careers after I worked my way up to being a full producer. I left everything. And I went back to sharing an office. I mean, I had the most amazing office at a place called Saatchi and Saatchi. So I had done very well and gave it all up to start from the beginning. And so I started off as a strategist and I worked my way up. And then before I knew it, at I think about 25, 26, I became a vice president of strategy. And it was like all this power so early. And I worked my way up even further. And then at some point I realized that I knew where this journey was going. And simultaneously, I had all these dreams of ideas and goals, and I wanted to be speaking, and I wanted to be coaching, and I wanted to be out there. Meanwhile, my professional career was going on an ascent. Sure. And I thought to myself, if I don't leave now, I'm never going to leave. Yeah. And so I risked everything in 2013 and left the cushy comfort of running a division on Madison Avenue to start my journey. And it was like this, it was beautiful, but it was not easy because it took a lot to get off of that. And people always say to me, what was it that made you decide to make that shift? And I always tell them, I didn't want to die not knowing. When we are on that traditional path, we kind of know it's going to be more shoes and more this and more that. Yep. But then there's something inside of you that you're like, there's something inside of me that I need to give a chance. And if I don't give it a chance, I will never know. And so that was like what it was like for me. I gave it a chance and suddenly it was just like this journey of not only obviously generating abundance, but also making a deeper and a larger impact. Yeah. And that's how the journey began for me. I had left a very prominent role as a vice president of strategy, running a division, offices in New York, and an office I was like helping and leading in London, one in Texas and another in California. And so it was like a very high profile position. And at the same time, there was all this other potential. And so that's part of the reason why my business is based off of helping people activate their potential. And you don't necessarily have to leave a corporate job to do so. It's about giving the stuff that's inside of you a chance to rise, flourish, and develop. And so that was what my journey was like.
Well, so almost 100% of the folks that we've talked to in our episodes for nearly 2 years there was a commonality of that entrepreneurial spirit in some way, somehow was instilled upon them, or they were exposed to it when they were very young, and usually through parents or mentors or coaches. So it doesn't always have to be parents. However, it just always reminds me of how important it is that we give back to the community, and we give back to the people, the next generation, because without that, you might not be where you're sitting right now, because you wouldn't have been exposed to that. So let's talk. I want to ask you some questions about that journey. So as an entrepreneur, what's the biggest challenge you faced in growing your business?
Oh, wow. There's been so many challenges. I mean, being an entrepreneur is not easy. And I would say one of the biggest challenges is consistency. Being able to wake up each and every single morning and do what needs to get done. I always tell people when I'm coaching, when I'm leading, I'm always saying, you have to believe that you are the one. Because if you don't believe and embrace the identity and the awareness that you are the one, then what needs to get done will not get done. So part of it is about really embracing the entrepreneurial mindset. And that entrepreneurial mindset is all about some people would say from an academic, because I also am an entrepreneurial scholar, you talk about what they call the exploitation of opportunity, right? And so you need to be able to see opportunities where they may or may not exist. And that requires a number of different faculties and capacities, a little bit of foresight to say, So for me, a lot of it was about the challenge of being able to say, wake up every morning and not get distracted from the ways in which your time and your energy is being pulled in so many different directions. Being able to utilize tools like social media for the benefit of growing your brand and growing your business versus just water cooler talk, right? Chat, chat, chat. Oh my God, let's look at some cats. And so a lot of it is about really being able to make sure that the time management, where to place your focus, the rituals that are required, developing and honing that mindset. But I would say the biggest shift for me in my business came when I realized the importance of relationships and cultivating networking at the highest level. And many people, when I'm working with them and I'm coaching them, it's all about, do you have the relationships now that can support the next level of your business and personal growth? And very often people are not cultivating relationships and partnerships in a way that is truly supporting the evolution of who they are as professionals as well as their businesses. And so I would say that was the biggest shift for me, was really doubling down and focusing on developing high-level partnerships.
Yeah, so important, so important. So let me ask you another question on that journey. What surprised you? Like, what in that journey happened? You're like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that to happen.
I honestly was, oh my gosh, this is probably going to sound terrible. When people talk about good help is hard to find.
It's really true.
Whether it's, just get a virtual assistant, just get this. No. You start to realize that, I didn't expect it to be so difficult to find people that, that are really able to take work seriously. And you know what I mean? And so that to me was, and so what was beautiful though about it is when I truly, got committed and knew how to hire as an entrepreneur and knew how to set the level of expectations of what success looks like. And also did my due diligence and my job as a leader to say, this is the bigger picture. Because I do believe a lot of entrepreneurs, they are not communicating the larger purpose that inspires the collaborators and employees, et cetera, to support the work. And so I had to grow in that. And so I always say, I didn't expect it to be that difficult, but once I realized that it's, again, I have to be the one to set that level, then it got easier to hire. Because I was able to communicate and transmit the purpose.
Well, and I'm saying yes, like I want to give you a high five because that's what we do. In our company is we help entrepreneurs. We instill the system, a system to actually help them to hire and help them to make those right decisions and help them to lead those people. And again, almost 100% of the entrepreneurs that I've spoken with over the last 2 years, the commonality is that point around, how did they leverage? Who did they leverage through the mistakes that they made there? So let me ask you one more question on the entrepreneurial journey, and then we're going to shift gears and talk about all the great stuff that you're doing. If you were sitting in front of a 20-year-old version of you today, first of all, that'd be cool, right? Someday we're going to be able to do that. We're going to go back in time. What would you tell that 20-year-old if you had to give them advice?
It's going to sound so cliche, but I would say trust yourself. You know more than you think you know.
Yeah.
Trust your truth. Trust what you're seeing, what you're feeling, and trust that it will all work out because it will.
Yeah.
Because you are committed to it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's great advice. It's great advice. Okay. So now we're going to talk about the great stuff that you're doing. So first, I want to ask you, let's talk about the World Dream Day. I mean, talk about, I read when I was, we were doing the research and I read 74 million people. Like, really?
Yeah.
Like, wow.
And you know what's wild? Okay, so backing up, okay, World Dream Day, people think that it was like invented and created in a way where I was already an entrepreneur. It actually began before I became an entrepreneur. I actually was on a business retreat and I saw this book, and I think it said, "Don't die with your music still in you." And it was written by the guy, if you remember, the Subway Sinatra guy.
I do remember the title, right? Yep.
The Subway Sinatra, who always had the dream of singing and began singing in the subways while he was working in the subways and got discovered. Right. And so when I opened up that book before our business retreat, I read this quote by Sarah Bambronic, and it said, "The world needs dreamers and the world needs doers, but above all, the world needs dreamers that do." And that quote, just exactly that image, the way you just said, "Woo!" That's how I felt. It was like it exploded within me because I said, that's exactly it. You can't have people mindlessly taking action without a greater vision. And you can't have people just dreaming without taking action. Yeah. When you bring the dream and action together, that is when things really begin to move. And that's also when systems begin to transform. And so I went to bed and I woke up the next morning and I heard, it was kind of crazy because I heard a voice that said, "Small dreams, big dreams, bring them all. Tonight we dance at the Dreamers Ball." And I thought, am I supposed to create some kind of Dreamers Ball where people are dancing for their dreams? And then suddenly I thought to myself, you know what? Maybe we can't create a ball, but we can create a day. We can create a day for dreamers. And it began as a day in Brooklyn that was participated with people in different parts of America. And then suddenly I started to see people in St. Lucia sending me pictures. And suddenly I was like, oh my gosh, this has become something.
Right.
And so you fast forward and you say, well, how did we get to 74 million in 2020? If we think about the context of the world we were living in, people needed dreams in a very big way.
Yes.
But if you think about everything that took place all those years, I was always creating themes and content and sharing and making it a very porous movement where people could actually celebrate it without even having to do anything more than knowing the theme and taking action and creating it for themselves. So I designed it as this kind of open source collaborative movement. And what's interesting, a fun fact that I haven't mentioned is, at the time I was actually teaching at Columbia University. So I was teaching a course, 5 years, I taught a course called Developing and Implementing Ideas at the master's level. And yes, but when I created World Dream, they actually began it anonymously, because something inside of me said, if I kind of not put myself in the forefront and really make it so people would see World Dream Day was created by an anonymous professor at Columbia University. So it truly was about service. And then years later, I began to say, hey, that anonymous professor, her name is Ozioma Egwuonwu.
I'll take credit for that.
But not only that, take credit. People also wanted to know, what are the origins?
Sure.
And so when we hit 74 million, it was because people were making songs about it, right? There were people leveraging it. At one point, Disney used it to launch a version of BFG. So you start to see these organizations and individuals celebrating it in a way, because the conversation of ideas, goals, and dreams had risen in culture in a meaningful way, and people were resonating with this concept. And so I just love it every year because it continues to grow.
Oh, it's just watching you talk about it, you just light up when you talk about it. So when did it start? This was 2013, 2012?
2012. 2012 is when it first began. Yeah. That's when it first began. And again, I cannot claim that through our own headquarters generated that. It's the extended reach of all the people who are participating in it, whether they are connected back to source. They just know there's something called World Dream Day. And we have to celebrate it. But I'll also say one thing that's really important for entrepreneurs, right? Because we're in a space right now where people are finding it very difficult to have to pay the thousands of dollars to get that, that reach, right? It's either you earn it or you pay for it, right?
Or you do something viral that you shouldn't have, and
Exactly.
Yeah.
What you find is when you start thinking about how do you embed your idea, your business, what you're servicing within culture. We were able to actually get into the algorithms through the day calendars that are all around the world. And once we were listed there, it began to take its own momentum. And that was the way we were able to circumvent having to spend so much, because we were actually embedding ourselves strategically within culture.
It's just a great concept. I mean, so if somebody got exposed to it, I mean, it makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Challenges that when it comes to developing that idea, like what challenges have you experienced in helping others like develop their ideas?
Oh, this is my favorite thing, because this is like where I really work very well and I'm passionate about, because I do it. And I also love it. This is why I'm so passionate about it, because I work with, Fortune 50 companies, and then also with like local grassroots entrepreneurs. And it's always the same thing, right? It's about the challenge of clarity and understanding the larger purpose. Very often we start off and we have like a glimmer of an idea, but we haven't done the due diligence to really develop it and really kind of get a full sense, what I call a fuller picture of the future. And so a lot of what I do is actually bring them into a process of actually envisioning creative visualization processes that support teams and individuals in really kind of getting a sense of what the idea is about, right? It's this first step of clarity. And then I would say, rather than it just be like, okay, I want to do this, begin to think about impact. And the more that we go from clarity of what is this idea that we're trying to implement to, okay, now how do we want it to actually play a role and impact others, to then what will be required. But I would say the biggest thing, one of the biggest challenges, and I just actually taught about this over this past weekend in a training that I do called Dreams to Action. I call it dream prep, because very often we're like, I got to do this, I got to do this, I got to do this. But you actually don't actually identify what are the essential steps that are required on a foundational basis, on a foundational level that
Right.
will support the fruition of this project at the highest level. And very often, people are actually not starting off with the right steps. They're
Yeah.
just thinking like, oh, I just want to do this, jump
They're
off
just
and start
going to
doing
do
this.
it. Yeah.
Just going to do it without actually really understanding what are those foundational elements that I need to put in place in order to be able to be successful.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. So much sense. So let me ask you this: like, what advice would you give to leaders? Like, I think there's a lot of leaders right now that are struggling. I think there's a status quo type of mentality, and and it's an interesting time to be a leader, right? I mean, I think it's always an interesting time to be a leader,
Yes.
but right now I think it's a really interesting time. So, what advice would you give to a leader who's got that type of challenges in mindset right now?
Yeah. So it's interesting that you asked that because in addition to the work that I do with, obviously World Dream Day and BurnBright, I also am expert faculty with Singularity University in Portugal and also global headquarters do some speaking engagements on that. And in that space, very often when we're talking about leaders and the mindset and the challenges leaders face, a lot of it is tied to uh, the challenges of, people talk about it as VUCA, right? The volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity, and the ambiguity. So this
Mhm.
idea about not really knowing how to proceed, right? And how
Right.
do we deal with black swans and anti-fragility and all of this? And I would say the biggest challenge is really about getting out of your own way and almost embracing beginner's mind as opposed to the mindset of being overwhelmed. And so it's kind of
Mhm.
like if I were to start and not actually say, oh my God, how are we going to deal with this? But
Right.
okay, let's take a step back. Let's without, and this is very hard to do,
Sure.
but to take a step back and say, what is needed now from this? It's almost like allowing the context and the situation and the desire for impact to be the leader. And
Okay.
then you are honoring what needs to happen now for the greatness and for the support of all. So I
Interesting.
think a lot of times leaders are imposing either the past or the assumptions of what they believe they're supposed to be doing,
Right.
as opposed to actually leading from, Otto Scharmer and this idea of theory U, et cetera, leading from the emerging future, leading
Yeah.
from what is arising from the context in its uniqueness. And when we actually look at it, then we realize, wait, I can't impose everything that I knew because right now what is emerging is a new unique challenge. And
Right.
it requires me paying attention and maybe even bringing others on board in order
Sure.
to collectively solve it. So I don't think in the context of just one leader. I
Right.
think in the context of leadership arising from even your followers, right? Even your employees. Leadership can arise from anywhere.
Yeah.
And the person who may be the leader in that moment, it's also their responsibility to look and to take guidance from all those who have convened upon this situation to help address it. And that's every level of the organization.
A question around that, do you think that that is, and I love what you said, by the way, because I think it makes so much sense. In the environment that we have today with social media and all the access to all of that stuff, does that make it more difficult, like as a human being, because you're putting it out there and you have to put it out there, and boy, it's there's judgment all over the place. It doesn't matter what side you're on, right? So is that am I kind of seeing that the right way?
It depends on the context, right? So you're saying like the role of social media and how one leads in the
Right.
situations that they
Right.
find themselves in.
Yeah.
And I think that of course it makes it difficult, right? Because you
Yeah.
are getting all these different voices about what you should be doing or what's impacting what. And it is important for the leader to obviously know that, know thyself, right? But
Right.
also know the context that we're in. And
Yeah.
so I think it's important to take the signals of what's being communicated with a grain of salt, but don't assume that it matters or it doesn't matter, if that makes sense, right? Because
Yeah.
sometimes
Yeah.
you have leaders who read something on social media and it's one person and they're making a big deal about it
Sure.
and they
Sure.
haven't actually assessed, wait, what's really going on here? So I
Yeah.
think that pause or that a bit of the healthy distance is so essential to be
Right.
able to say, okay, how should we proceed? And part of that is also thinking about it holistically. So not just thinking about the immediate fire, which is what I think a lot of leaders end up having
Right.
to address, right? The immediate fires and not thinking about what does the future need? How do we actually address and approach solutions that are steeped in the now, but also have insight and awareness and a desire to support an evolutionary next? And so this is actually something that I get asked a lot about, is how do you lead in the present while also trying to support the co-creation of this new future? And it's not easy, but it does take into account that we have to find a way of not getting so absorbed. But also, one thing that I didn't mention is this belief in what I call a transformational mindset, which is to develop the confidence in your capacities that you have what it takes in order to transform the situation itself and also the trajectory. And very often leaders are so focused on just the immediate situation that they're actually not taking that long-term view and saying, wait a minute, I am invited to think about the trajectory of where not only my business, but our entire industry, our entire world is headed. Yep. And when you do that, it shifts the way in which you make decisions in the present. It really
makes perfect sense. It makes such perfect sense. Okay, so I prepared you for this. We're going to shift gears. Tell me the best advice that you've ever been given that hopefully you followed and what you learned.
Oh my gosh. The best advice that I've been given, I would say, is from my mother, and she is late now, many years, about a decade. She passed away. And I remember her always saying, when the door opens, step in, look around, and if you like what you see, keep going forth. And if you don't, walk right back out.
Wow.
And that advice single-handedly has been the best advice of my life, because it always empowered me to realize if I am not okay with what I see as I am going down a particular journey, I have the invitation and the freedom and the permission to step out, to change the context, to do something different. And it's been just a grace. That was the best advice.
What great advice. What great advice. And parents usually have great advice. We just don't listen to it most of the time at the time, right? We're like, no, I don't buy that.
In my case, my mother and I, we were like best friends, you know? And so I was listening, and I still do in many ways to that advice.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we're going to flip it upside down. What's the worst advice that you've ever been given that hopefully you didn't follow? And if you did, what did you learn?
The worst advice that I've been given that I didn't follow?
Or you did, and what did you learn?
What did I learn?
Like, what's some bad advice?
You know, okay, so here's some advice. There was one, I'm not going to name particular names, but there was a particular situation where I was under consideration for a specific partnership, right? And they wanted me to go about doing some things in terms of like social media and showing up in a certain kind of way that just was not authentic to me.
Yeah.
And they really wanted me to play to people's weaknesses and their strengths. And I just don't do that. Like, I speak to leaders. I speak to people that are full of potential. I don't speak to you from a space of, don't you want to be me? You know what I mean? And there's that marketing. And so it was bad advice that I'm happy I did not take. I did consider taking, especially when I was younger, like maybe this is what I need to do, but I didn't take it. And yes, it's been, obviously in some ways, a slower growth in terms of when you are speaking to people's problems, but it's been one that is, my journey has been one that has been filled with so much integrity. And I'm so proud of that. But that was bad advice, I consider it bad advice when, go ahead.
You have to be true to yourself, right? And you certainly, you show up that way. So thank goodness you didn't follow that advice. Thank goodness.
But it's very easy, right? To be like, let me go that route where it's all about exploiting people's, fears and doubts about themselves. And I'm like, no, I want to speak to people's potential, even if they may not see it in themselves. I'm a stand for that.
Well, that's it. That's actually the easier route, right? That's the easier route. And so most people take easy versus the right way. Yeah. So I am going to do a little PSA. You are going to come up with a final thought to leave us with. And so, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thank you so much for your support. Frankly, we do this because of you, and we do it because you listen. So if you want to get updates, subscribe at www.thesuccessascent.com or at your favorite podcast source. We also have a YouTube channel. You can go and watch the lives, and then when we do post the podcast. So we just so appreciate your support and leave some ratings, comments, get in touch with us, whatever you'd like to do to give us feedback. We'd love that. So, Ozioma, let's have it. Let's have the last bit of advice that you're going to give us before we leave today.
I would say that my last bit of advice is inspired by the recent passings of some of the greatest, not, these aren't entrepreneurs, but they're great souls, great beings like Thich Nhat Hanh.
Yeah.
And I feel that there's an invitation for all of us to be able to kind of like lead our businesses and lead our lives from a higher level. You know what I mean? A higher level perspective. And we've all been going through so many challenges right now, economically, emotionally, politically, and so on and so forth. So the invitation is to use your life and your business as an invitation, an opportunity to rise up from this and lead in a way that lifts all of us up and moves all of us forward. That is the invitation.
We definitely need it, don't we? We definitely need those people to rise up.
I'm
gonna real quick talk to us about the BurnBright Lifeworks.com. So when I go there, what am I gonna get?
So when you go there, that's my website, and it consistently changes in different ways. But essentially, it's an invitation just to kind of connect, learn a little bit more about the services, learn a little bit more about the journey, and kind of like have that be the beginning part of the journey of learning more about BurnBright International, which is focused on, coaching, consulting, and training, and just overall inspiring people to create their best work and live their best lives.
And we'll put these websites in the show notes as well. And then also talk to us about worlddreamday.org. What am I going to get when I go there?
So when you go to World Dream Day, you're going to get, our past experiences, as well as very soon, we're going to be updating the theme for World Dream Day this year, which takes place on September 25th every year. So that is the global headquarters for World Dream Day that kind of gives you a sense of where we've been, where we currently are, and where we're headed. And I hope that you will join us. Check out hashtag World Dream Day and make sure September 25th that you join us this year.
I love it. Well, that you're given enough notice based upon when we're doing the show, so they shouldn't have any problems with putting it in their schedule, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, feel free, those who are listening, to connect with me on LinkedIn. It's Ozioma on LinkedIn. You'll find me, as well as on my Instagram. It's also Ozioma. And so I love getting, people reaching out and connecting and via LinkedIn and Instagram and so forth. Yeah,
I love it. I love it. And we'll definitely put those in the show notes. Well, Ozioma, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah. And as I leave our listeners every show, be happy, be healthy, be safe until the next time we talk. Take care, everybody. Thank you for joining us on The Ascent today. You can find us at any of your favorite podcast sources. You can also subscribe to get updates and additional pieces of value that we send out at www.thesuccessascent.com. Thanks so much for your support. Please leave us a review. Have an amazing day. Take care.